It wasn't supposed to end like this. When Emma first mentioned the party, I didn't think much of it. I mean, we'd been married long enough for me to recognize her patterns. A typical night out with Chloe and her group, some drinks, maybe a little dancing, nothing wild. That's what I had always assumed. Anyway, but this time something felt off. Maybe it was the casual way she slipped it into conversation, like she was testing the waters. Or maybe it was the fact that Chloe was notorious for throwing the kind of parties people gossiped about for all the wrong reasons. I tried not to dwell on it, told myself I was overthinking. Still, that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. See, I know Emma better than anyone. I can tell when something's bothering her. Lately, she'd been distracted, lost in thought, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. The late nights, the vague excuses. I tried bringing it up before, but those talks always ended in fights. This time, though, it wasn't just frustration or jealousy eating at me. It was fear. Fear that we were teetering on the edge of something we might not be able to come back from. The night before the party, I couldn't keep it in anymore. "I don't think you should go," I said, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "It's not that I don't trust you, Emma. It's just, I don't know. Something feels wrong. Feels like we're drifting, and I can't shake it." Her reaction threw me. She snapped, her eyes narrowing, that familiar mix of irritation and condescension bubbling to the surface. "There you go again," she said, her tone sharp. "It's just a party, for God's sake. Chloe's hosting, not some random stranger. Why do you always do this?" That word, always, hit me like a punch to the gut. She made it sound like I was some paranoid, overbearing husband, constantly monitoring her every move. That wasn't fair. I'd always given her space, trusted her to have her own life, confident that our marriage was strong enough to handle anything. But lately, something had changed. She wasn't just distant. She was slipping away from me, piece by piece. Emotionally, physically. She wasn't present anymore, and it was like I was holding on to a ghost of the person I used to know. "I'm not trying to control you," I said, fighting to keep my cool. "I'm just telling you how I feel. Something about this party doesn't sit right with me. Can we at least talk about it?" She rolled her eyes, brushing me off like my worries were nothing but ridiculous insecurities. "What is there to talk about? You're acting like I'm gonna run off with someone the second I walk out the door. It's just a night out. That's all it is." But it wasn't just a night out. Not to me. It was everything, the growing distance between us, the constant excuses, the way she seemed to be here but not really here. That party felt like the tipping point, the last thread holding us together before it all unraveled. And yet, instead of pushing back, I let it go. I don't even know why. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I thought if I gave her this, things would somehow go back to the way they were. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew it was too late. I was just so tired. Tired of the endless arguments. Tired of feeling like I was the only one trying to hold us together while she seemed so ready to let everything fall apart. So, when she walked out that night, I didn't try to stop her. I wanted to, but I couldn't find the strength to fight anymore. But sitting alone in that silent, empty house, it was unbearable. Hours dragged by as I paced the floors, my thoughts spiraling out of control. By midnight, there was still no word from her. Not a call, not a text. Just the cold echo of a house that didn't feel like home anymore. Finally, I snapped. Couldn't take it. I needed answers, needed to know what was going on, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app we'd installed years ago. Back then, it was just for practical things, like when she kept losing her phone. But tonight, it felt like something much darker. Invasive. Wrong. I hesitated for a second, but the need to know won out. The app loaded, and her location popped up. I expected it to show Chloe's house or maybe some bar downtown. But what I saw made my stomach drop. A motel. Not just any motel, the kind of rundown, edge-of-town dump that people go to when they're looking for privacy they shouldn't need. I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, my mind racing. A motel? What the hell was she doing there? My chest tightened as a mix of anger and dread flooded through me. This wasn't just a party anymore. This was something else. Something I hadn't wanted to believe was possible. But now, staring at that screen, I couldn't deny it. Without another thought, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The drive felt endless, even though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they ached, and my heart felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of my chest. Every few seconds, I glanced down at my phone, watching that tiny dot marking Emma's location. It hadn't moved. She was still there. Part of me wanted to turn the car around, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew better. I'd been telling myself for months that the distance between us was just stress, bad timing, or some rough patch we could work through. But this felt like the answer I'd been dreading. When I finally pulled into the motel parking lot, my stomach churned. The place was exactly what I imagined. A rundown, sketchy dump with a flickering neon sign that read Westmore Motel, the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be seen. Cheap, quiet, perfect for keeping secrets. I parked far enough away to avoid drawing attention and sat there for a moment, gripping my phone. The dot was still there, blinking steadily on the screen. She was inside. One of those rooms held my wife, and possibly the truth I wasn't ready to face. Stepping out of the car, I could feel my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The cold night air did nothing to calm me. My thoughts were a blur of worst-case scenarios. I pictured Emma with someone else, imagined the betrayal, the lies. It was like every fear I tried to push down over the years was clawing its way to the surface. As I walked across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, my steps felt heavy. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound louder. The motel loomed in front of me, dimly lit and ominous, like something out of a bad dream. I wasn't ready for what I might find, but at this point I didn't have a choice. Laughing, smiling, acting in ways I hadn't seen her act with me in months. That was the first thing I heard when I got close. Emma's laughter, light and carefree, twisted the knife in my chest. Her car was parked at the far end of the lot, tucked into a shadowy corner, almost like she didn't want anyone to notice it. That was all the confirmation I needed. My heart sank as I stood there, staring at her car, the truth hitting me like a tidal wave. There was no explanation she could give, no excuse that would make this okay. She was here, at a motel, and there wasn't a single good reason for it. The trust we'd spent years building? Gone. Shattered into pieces too jagged to put back together. I clenched my fists as I approached the room nearest her car, room 214. My steps felt heavy, like I was dragging the weight of everything I didn't want to believe. The blinds were pulled tight, but a faint glow from the lamp inside bled through the edges. I stopped, frozen just outside the door. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Did I really want to see this? Did I truly want to know what was happening on the other side of that door? But deep down, I already knew. I raised my hand to knock, but stopped just inches away. Instead, I leaned in, pressing my ear to the door, straining to hear anything. Any sound that would confirm or deny what I feared most. At first, there was only silence. Then I heard her. Her voice, soft and playful, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. A man's voice followed, low and muffled but unmistakable. That was all it took. The rage surged through me, and before I even realized what I was doing, I was pounding on the door. Hard, loud. The laughter inside stopped abruptly, replaced by hurried movements, panicked whispers and frantic shuffling. It was everything I didn't want to believe. Everything I tried to convince myself wasn't real. My body trembled as adrenaline flooded my veins, my mind spinning in a storm of anger and betrayal. I hit the door again, harder this time, my voice breaking as I demanded answers. Finally, the door creaked open just a crack, and there she was, Emma. Her face was pale, her expression stunned. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged, and every inch of her screamed guilt. She looked like someone who had been caught red-handed and couldn't think of a lie fast enough to save herself. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and sharp, her eyes darting nervously around the parking lot as if afraid someone might see us. I didn't care who saw. I didn't care about anything in that moment except the truth. What am I doing here? I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. What are you doing here? I pushed the door open wider, forcing my way in. That's when I saw him. A man I didn't recognize sat frozen on the edge of the bed, his face pale and wide-eyed like a deer caught in headlights. The rumpled sheets on the bed told me everything I needed to know. Emma stepped out quickly, pulling the door shut behind her, as if that would somehow shield me from the ugly truth I'd already seen. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice trembling. But her eyes gave her away. They were desperate, darting back and forth as if she could somehow spin this into something it wasn't. I laughed, cold and bitter, the sound hollow in the quiet night. Isn't it? I said, my voice dripping with disbelief. Because it looks exactly like what it is. From where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what it is, I said, my voice cold and sharp. The weight of her betrayal hit me like a freight train. After everything, after all the chances, all the times I told myself to trust her, this is what she chose. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my arm, as if touching me would somehow undo the damage. Let me explain, she said, her voice shaking with desperation. I jerked my arm away, disgusted. Explain? Explain what? Emma? You're at a motel. With him. My words cut through the air, each one dripping with the betrayal I couldn't ignore any longer. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. No excuses. No deflection. Nothing. And for the first time, I realized there was nothing left for her to say. That's when I knew it was over. Her hand fell to her side, her face shifting from shock to something colder, harder. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry she'd been caught. I glanced at the door, half expecting the guy inside to come out and face me. But he didn't. He stayed hidden, sitting on the edge of the bed like a coward, probably hoping I'd leave before things got worse. This isn't what you think, Emma said again, her voice steadier now, as if she thought she could somehow take back control of the situation. We should talk. Let's go somewhere and figure this out. Talk? I snapped, my voice rising. What's there to talk about, Emma? You're standing outside a motel room with another man while I've been at home worried sick, blaming myself, thinking there was something wrong with us. And now you're here, proving me right. Her eyes flicked back to the door, then back to me, panic flashing across her face. She was scrambling, reaching for something, anything, that might make this look less damning than it was. It's not what you think, she said again, quieter this time. Things haven't been right between us for a while. I didn't know how to handle it. I came here to clear my head. To clear your head? I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. Is that what you call this? Don't insult me, Emma. You're caught. Don't sit here and pretend this is anything but exactly what it looks like. She stepped closer, her tone softening, her eyes wide with a desperate mix of guilt and manipulation. I'm sorry, okay? I know I messed up, but we can work through this. Let's just go somewhere and talk. Please. Her words felt hollow, like she didn't even believe them herself. I shook my head, the anger and disbelief crashing over me in waves. Work through this, I repeated, my voice trembling. How? How do you fix this, Emma? You've been lying to me for months. Disappearing, making excuses. I've been at home, blaming myself for everything, thinking I was the problem. And this is what you've been doing the whole time. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she whispered, I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't think it would go this far. Her words felt like knives, cutting deeper with every syllable. Go this far, I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. Emma, it went too far the moment you chose to lie to me. The moment you stepped into that room, you made your choice. And it wasn't us. She opened her mouth, ready to plead again, but I wasn't about to let her. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice quieter now, not from calm, but from sheer exhaustion. I was drained, beaten down from carrying the weight of our failing marriage on my own for so long. Was it worth destroying everything we built? Because I'm done, Emma. I'm done fighting for someone who walked away months ago. Her eyes dropped to the ground, and for the first time her mask cracked. I could see the guilt there, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that came from hurting me. No, it was guilt for herself, for getting caught, for losing control of the web of lies she'd spun. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered again, her voice breaking just a little. I don't want this to be the end. Please, let's figure this out. I'll make it right. Her words sounded hollow now, like a song I'd heard one too many times. I let out a bitter, empty laugh that echoed in the stillness. It's already over, Emma, I said, my voice flat. The moment you lied, the moment you chose someone else over us, you ended it. There's nothing left to fix. You don't get to make it right now. That's when the tears started. Whether they were real or just another attempt to sway me, I couldn't tell. I wasn't even sure I cared. She stood there, dabbing at her eyes, trying to look remorseful. But it was too late for that. The damage was done. No amount of tears could undo what she'd done. All I felt was emptiness. A cold, hollow void where the love we once had used to be. You need to leave, I said finally, my anger giving way to resignation. Go back inside, do whatever you want, but don't come home. We're done. Her head snapped up, panic flooding her face. Please don't say that. Don't just throw us away like this. That final plea stirred something in me. Not love, not compassion, but a flicker of anger. It rose up one last time, sharp and raw. Throw us away? I said, my voice cutting like a blade. You already did that, Emma. I'm just finishing what you started. I didn't wait for her response. Couldn't. I turned and walked away, each step heavy but somehow more certain than the last. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see her tears, her regret, or any more of her meaningless apologies. I got into my car and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as the weight of it all crashed over me. It was over. Years of marriage, years of love and trust, gone in one night. And yet, as I sat there in the silence of my car, something strange crept in. Relief. It was faint at first, but it grew with each breath. It was like a weight I didn't even realize I'd been carrying had been lifted. I'd been holding on to something broken, trying to fix it on my own while it crumbled in my hands. Now, at least the truth was out. The fight was over. I started the car and drove away from that motel, the quiet streets blurring past me as the adrenaline faded. All that was left was a deep, aching numbness. And maybe, just maybe, a tiny flicker of freedom. My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, the city lights smearing past in a blur. I didn't feel anger anymore, not even betrayal. Just emptiness. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Not with half-hearted apologies outside a cheap motel. Not with her begging for something we both knew was already gone. When I pulled into the driveway, the sight of our house did nothing to comfort me. It looked the same as it always had, but it no longer felt like home. It was just a building now, a hollow shell where two people had spent too long pretending everything was fine. I stayed in the car, staring at the front door, unable to move. I knew that the moment I stepped inside, it would all be real. There'd be no going back. Everything would change. I sat there, running the last few months through my head like a broken record. How had I missed the signs? The late nights without explanations. The way she'd walk through the door, acting like everything was normal. Even though the distance between us had grown so vast I could hardly see her anymore. I thought of all the times I'd tried to reach out, tried to connect, only for her to shut me down. She'd brush off my concerns like they were nothing. How long had she been lying to me? How long had she been cheating? Bitterness rose in my chest, sharp and heavy, but I shoved it down. There was no point in being angry now. The truth was, I'd lost her a long time ago. I'd just been too stubborn, too blind to admit it. Eventually, I forced myself to get out of the car. The house was dark and silent, just like it had been when she left earlier that night. I tossed my keys onto the counter and stood there in the kitchen, the weight of it all crashing down on me like a wave I couldn't escape. The clock read 2 a.m. She'd be back soon. At least I thought she would. The fight outside the motel had been raw, brutal, but I knew Emma. She wouldn't just disappear. She'd come back, try to explain, try to twist it into something less awful than it was. But I was done. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sank onto the couch. The room was cold, the silence oppressive. I stared at the wall as I took a long drink, the bitterness of the beer matching the bitterness gnawing at my chest. It didn't matter. I just needed something, anything, to cut through the emptiness. My mind drifted back to the night we first moved into this house. We'd been married for 2 years, still caught in that honeymoon glow where everything seemed perfect. I could picture Emma's face so clearly, the excitement in her eyes as we unpacked together, laughing, talking about the future. We had big plans back then. Kids, vacations, a life we were going to build side by side. That felt like a lifetime ago now. All I could see in my mind was the look on her face when she opened that motel door. The panic, the guilt, the lies. Even when she was caught red-handed, she couldn't stop lying. I took another long drink, the bitterness settling deep in my chest as I waited for the inevitable knock on the door. Even caught red-handed, she still tried to twist it, to spin some excuse, as if there was anything left to salvage. As if we could just sweep it all under the rug and go back to pretending everything was fine. But there was no going back. Not anymore. The front door creaked open, and I heard her soft footsteps in the hallway. She stopped, hesitating, probably unsure if I was still there. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just sat there, waiting. Eventually, she walked into the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red from crying. She looked different now, like the weight of what she'd done was finally hitting her. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. She sat down in the chair across from me, keeping a careful distance. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence, the space between us feeling wider than it had ever been. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Can we talk?" she whispered, her voice shaky and uncertain. I didn't respond right away. I didn't even look at her. I just took another long sip of my beer, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. "What is there to talk about?" I asked finally, my voice cold and detached. "You've already said enough." She looked down, wiping at her eyes with trembling hands. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I swear, it wasn't what it looked like. That made me laugh. A raw, bitter sound that felt like it scraped my throat on the way out. It wasn't what it looked like?" I repeated, my gaze cutting toward her. "Emma, I caught you in a motel room with another man. How much worse could it possibly be?" Her voice cracked as she pleaded. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things between us, and I made a terrible mistake. But it's not what you think." I finally turned to face her, my gaze sharp, unyielding. "You cheated, Emma. You lied. And even now, you're still lying. Just admit it. Stop trying to make this into something it's not." She flinched, as if the words had struck her physically. Tears welled up again, spilling over as she whispered, "I'm not lying. I know it looks bad, but it was a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything. I was lost, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to deal with everything." Her excuses didn't move me. The anger I felt wasn't fiery anymore. It was cold, heavy, and resolute. The kind of anger that settles in when you realize it's over. "It's done, Emma," I said, setting my beer down with deliberate finality. "There's no fixing this. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Her head shook violently, panic creeping into her voice. "Please don't say that. I love you. I don't want to lose you." I stood, my movements slow and deliberate, and headed for the hallway. Without looking back, I said, "You already lost me." Her sobs filled the air as I walked away, but I didn't stop. The truth was out now, and for the first time in months I felt free. There was nothing left to fight for. I made my way to the bedroom and shut the door softly behind me. Her muffled sobs echoed faintly from the living room, but I tuned them out. The tears, the desperation. It was all too little, too late. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of everything pressing down on me, heavy but strangely final. It wasn't the fiery heartbreak I'd imagined it would be. There was no screaming, no throwing things, no dramatic collapse. It was quieter, emptier, a hollow acceptance that this was the end. The room around me felt unfamiliar, colder somehow, like it wasn't mine anymore. My eyes wandered to the walls, taking in the photos and mementos of the life we'd built together. Smiling faces on vacations, our wedding day, little tokens of a love that had once felt unshakable. But now it all seemed distant, like I was looking at someone else's memories. My gaze landed on a photo from our honeymoon. We were on a beach, the sun casting golden light over us as we laughed, carefree, as if the world couldn't touch us. How had it come to this? How had something that felt so perfect unraveled so completely? Or maybe it hadn't been quick at all. Maybe the cracks had been forming for years, slowly, quietly. Emma's betrayal wasn't the start of the end. It was just the final nail in a coffin we'd been building together for a long time. A soft knock at the door broke through my thoughts. I didn't respond. I didn't want to. But after a pause, the door opened anyway. Emma stood there, her face streaked with tears, her features etched with raw desperation. "Can we just talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She hovered in the doorway, hesitant, like she knew there was nothing left to say but couldn't bring herself to leave. I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply, the woman I had built a life with, and yet now all I could see was a stranger. Someone who had made choices I couldn't understand. Someone who had thrown away everything we had for a fleeting moment of selfishness. "What is there to talk about, Emma?" I said finally, my voice flat, emotionless. "Do you think more words are going to change anything? That somehow we can go back to the way things were?" I shook my head, my gaze unwavering. "We're past that. Way past it." She stepped into the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold together her breaking pieces. Her voice trembled as she said, "I know I ruined everything. I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll end it with him. I swear." I cut her off, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "There's nothing left to end, Emma. I don't care about him. I don't care about your excuses. The moment you walked into that motel room, you ended us." Her face crumbled at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked shattered, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Please, I love you. I know I made a horrible mistake, but I still love you. We can fix this. I know we can." I shook my head slowly, feeling the cold weight of finality settle in my chest. "You love me?" I asked, my voice low but sharp, slicing through her sobs. "Are you sure about that? Because this—" I gestured vaguely at her, at the room, at everything crumbling around us. "This doesn't feel like love, Emma. Feels like guilt. And guilt isn't enough to fix what you've broken." Her body shook as she collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs grew louder, raw, and uncontrollable. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I couldn't hold her, couldn't say it would be okay. Not anymore. The truth was brutal, unrelenting. I didn't trust her. Not now. Not ever again. I stood, my resolve hardening like steel. "I'm leaving, Emma," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. "I can't stay here and pretend there's anything left to fix. We're done." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mix of panic and disbelief. "What do you mean, you're leaving?" Her voice cracked, desperation dripping from every word. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," I said bluntly, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. "But I can't stay here. Not in this house. Not in this life built on lies. I need to get away. Anywhere but here." She stumbled toward me, her hands trembling as she reached out, pleading, "Please don't go. Don't just walk out like this. We can fix this. Therapy, we'll go to therapy. I'll do anything. Please, don't leave." I stepped back, out of her reach, my eyes narrowing as I shook my head. "No, Emma. This isn't something therapy can fix. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed us. You crossed a line, and there's no coming back from that. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her sobs quieted, her breath hitching as she struggled to find words that wouldn't come. For a fleeting second, regret crept into my chest. A sharp, burning ache as I thought about what we used to be, what we used to have. The laughter, the love, the life we'd planned. But it was gone. All of it. Burned to ash by her choices. I turned back to my bag, stuffing it with clothes, my laptop, and anything else I'd need to get through the next few days. Each item I packed felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage, and I could see it breaking her. Her face crumpled with every move I made, tears streaming as if they could somehow wash away what she'd done. When I zipped the bag and threw it over my shoulder, she stepped in front of the door, her hands trembling as she held out her arms to block me. "You can't just leave," she cried, her voice trembling with desperation. "I love you. Please, don't throw us away like this." I met her eyes, my stare cold and unyielding. "I'm not throwing anything away, Emma. You did that. I'm just walking away from the wreckage." Her body seemed to cave in on itself, her sobs turning into gasping breaths. But I didn't stop. I stepped around her, walking out of the bedroom without looking back. The house felt hollow as I passed through it. This place where we had built dreams together, made plans, created a life. It was nothing more than an empty shell now, a graveyard for everything we used to be. The front door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. It wasn't the release I'd imagined. No flood of relief, no overwhelming sense of freedom. It was quieter than that, colder, like the eerie stillness after a hurricane, when the storm is over but the destruction stretches out in every direction. And somewhere in that quiet, amidst all the broken pieces, I felt the first faint flicker of something new. Not hope, at least not yet, but the start of something I hadn't felt in a long time. The beginning of letting go. At least the chaos had stopped. I got into my car and sat there, gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the empty street ahead. I had no plan, no idea where to go. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house for another second. The life I had built with Emma was gone, crumbled into ruins. Now I had to figure out how to rebuild something new, something without her. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, my mind racing even as a strange numbness settled over me. Every word we'd exchanged played on a loop in my head. Her desperate pleas, her hollow promises. None of it mattered. Nothing she could say or do would change the reality of what she'd done. She had broken something fundamental between us, something so essential that no apologies, no tears, could ever fix it. Trust doesn't come back when it's shattered like that. After about 20 minutes, I pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ending the night in a motel of my own after everything that had happened. But I didn't have the energy for reflection. I just needed somewhere to exist. Somewhere I could breathe without the suffocating weight of that house bearing down on me. The motel was every bit as run down as I expected. The fluorescent lights in the hallway flickered weakly, and the air was thick with the smell of stale smoke and cheap cleaning products. The walls were thin, the kind of place where even whispers traveled, but I didn't care. I paid in cash, checked in, and walked down a dimly lit corridor, the sound of my footsteps echoing faintly off the cracked walls. When I opened the door to my room, it was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. Worn-out furniture, a bed that looked as inviting as a slab of concrete, and a TV with a flicker so faint it seemed on its last leg. But none of it mattered. This wasn't home. It wasn't supposed to be. It was just a space, a temporary escape, a place where I could sit and let my mind unravel without worrying about what came next. I dropped my duffel bag on the bed and sat beside it, leaning forward and running my hands through my hair. The silence pressed in around me, heavy and oppressive, as the full weight of everything hit me. This was the first time in years that I was truly, truly alone. No Emma. No pretending things were okay. Just me, sitting in a dingy motel room, trying to make sense of how my life had unraveled in a single night. I pulled my phone from my pocket and stared at the screen, debating who to call. Ryan, my best friend, came to mind. He'd listen, no judgment, but it was late. He was probably asleep. And the truth was, I wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts, but after a moment, I put the phone down. What could I even say? Where would I begin? The wound was still too fresh, too raw. Instead, I leaned back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling as the silence wrapped around me. My thoughts drifted back to the argument in the bedroom, to Emma's tearful pleas, her desperate promises to fix what she had destroyed. But that was the problem. She didn't seem to understand. What Emma didn't seem to grasp was that some things can't be fixed. You can't stitch up a betrayal like this and expect it to heal. Trust isn't elastic. It doesn't snap back into place once it's been torn apart. I had given her everything, years of loyalty, love, and trust, and she had thrown it all away. For what? Some fleeting thrill? A coward's escape from the life we'd built together? The cheating gutted me, but it was more than that. It was the lies, the distance, the way she'd sat across from me at dinner, smiling like everything was fine, while she let our marriage rot from the inside out. I turned onto my side, the cheap motel bed creaking beneath me, and tried to shut it all out. Tried to close my eyes and will myself into some kind of oblivion. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept dragging me back, over and over, to the moment I'd seen her at the motel. The way her face twisted when she realized she'd been caught. The panic, the guilt, the desperation as she tried to spin the truth into something more palatable. Something that didn't make her look like a stranger. The image played in my head like a reel of film on repeat, each replay a fresh twist of the knife. Eventually, I grabbed my phone, my fingers moving before I even realized what I was doing. I started scrolling through old photos. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself of what we used to have, or maybe to see how far we'd fallen. There was one photo in particular, a hike we'd taken. She was smiling at the camera, her arm looped around mine like we were the happiest couple in the world. It was almost impossible to believe that the two people in that photo, the ones laughing like the world couldn't touch them, were the same ones who had stood in that bedroom hours ago, tearing each other apart. Morning light began to seep through the thin motel curtains, casting the room in a pale, washed-out glow. I woke up groggy, my neck stiff from the mattress that felt like concrete. For a fleeting moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The fight, the lies, the betrayal, the hollow ache in my chest returned, heavier than before. I reached for my phone again, half expecting to see a flood of missed calls or texts from Emma. But the screen was blank. Part of me felt relieved. Another part wondered if she'd stopped trying altogether, or if she was just sitting there, waiting for me to come crawling back. Either way, I wasn't going back. That much was clear. I stared at my phone, the weight of the silence crushing me. I needed to talk to someone. Keeping all of this inside wasn't going to help. Ryan came to mind. He'd been my best friend for years, and if there was anyone I could trust with this, it was him. I hesitated for a moment, the thought of saying the words aloud making my stomach twist. But eventually I pressed call. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Hey man," he said groggily. "Everything okay?" My throat tightened. The words stuck there, choking me, but I forced them out. "No," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. "I left, Ryan. I'm in a motel right now." There was a pause. Heavy. Loaded. I could practically hear him piecing it together. "What happened?" he asked, his voice softer now, cautious. "She's been cheating on me," I said, the words jagged and bitter in my mouth. "I caught her, last night, at a motel, with some guy." Ryan let out a long, heavy sigh, the kind of sound you make when you're trying to wrap your head around something that feels impossible. "Damn," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "I'm so sorry, man. I didn't see that coming. Neither had I." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, thick and unbearable. But for once, it didn't bother me. It was better than the chaos in my head. "Did I see this coming?" I said, shaking my head even though Ryan couldn't see me. I mean, I had my suspicions, but not like this. Not months. Not sneaking off to a motel with someone else. My hand tightened around the phone as I added. I confronted her. And even then, she just kept lying, trying to spin it into something else. "But it's over. I'm done." My voice sounded steady, but the words felt like lead in my mouth. Ryan was quiet on the other end, the kind of silence that came when someone was trying to figure out how to respond without making things worse. Finally, he asked gently, "Where are you now?" "Some crappy motel on the edge of town," I admitted, glancing around the room. The dim light and peeling wallpaper felt like the physical embodiment of everything falling apart. I couldn't stay in the house. Not after everything. "You want me to come by?" he offered. "We can grab breakfast or something. Talk it through." The thought of having someone there, someone outside of this mess, who wasn't tangled up in lies and betrayal, felt like a lifeline. "Yeah," I said, a faint sense of relief creeping in. "That would help." We agreed to meet at a diner not far from where I was staying. As I got ready, I realized how much I needed this. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of all of it on my own. The drive to the diner was short, but it felt like I was traveling miles, leaving behind the wreckage of the life I'd built and stepping, however uncertainly, into something new. It wasn't freedom. Not yet. But it was a step. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth in the corner. 2 steaming mugs of coffee sat on the table in front of him. He waved when he saw me, his expression a mix of sympathy and quiet concern. I slid into the booth, and he pushed one of the mugs toward me without saying a word. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like exactly what I needed. "So," he said, leaning forward, his hands wrapped tightly around his mug. "Tell me everything," and I did. Piece by piece, I unpacked it all. The weeks of distance, the lies Emma had spun, the gnawing suspicion that had driven me to track her. I told him about the motel, about seeing her with the other guy, about the confrontation and the way she tried to twist the truth even when she'd been caught red-handed. It all came out like I was emptying a bag that had grown far too heavy to carry alone. Ryan listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression grim. When I finally finished, he leaned back and let out a slow, measured breath. "Man, I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy. "There's no excuse for what she did. But I'm glad you left. You can't come back from something like that." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug in front of me. The coffee was hot and bitter, but grounding. "Yeah," I murmured. "I thought maybe we could fix things. Maybe therapy or, I don't know. But after last night, it's clear. There's nothing left to fix." Ryan tilted his head, studying me with a mix of concern and curiosity. "So, what's your plan now?" I shrugged, the words feeling foreign and uncertain. "I don't know yet. I guess I'll have to go back to the house at some point. Figure out the next steps. Divorce, probably. Move out." Saying it aloud made it feel real, like I was finally acknowledging that the life I'd known was slipping further and further away. Ryan gave me a sympathetic nod. "That's going to be tough, man. But you're doing the right thing. Look, if you need a place to crash, my couch is always open," Ryan said, his voice steady and sincere. "You don't need to be alone in that house right now." The offer was tempting, comforting, even. I knew he meant it, and for a second I considered taking him up on it. But something inside me pushed back. Some stubborn, unshakable part of me wanted to face it all head-on. "Thanks," I said, managing a faint smile. "I might take you up on that, but I think I need to go back. Just not yet." We spent the next hour talking, not just about Emma and the wreckage of my marriage, but about everything else. Work, life, the small, mundane things that had stayed steady while my world was turned upside down. It was comforting in a way I hadn't expected. A reminder that even when everything falls apart, some things remain constant. Ryan had a way of grounding me, of making things seem less impossible. He reminded me, without needing to say it outright, that this wasn't the end. It was just another brutal, painful chapter. When we stepped outside into the cool morning air, I felt a subtle shift inside me. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it was enough to remind me I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had friends. I had a life outside the ruins of my marriage. For the first time since last night, I felt a faint glimmer of hope. Not the naive hope that things would magically go back to the way they were, but the hope that I could rebuild. That maybe, just maybe, I could find myself again. "You'll get through this," Ryan said as we said goodbye, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're stronger than you think." I nodded, watching him drive away as the morning sun climbed higher into the sky. He was right. I didn't feel strong, not yet. I didn't feel like I had any control over my life. But I'd taken the first step. And sometimes that's all you can do. I sat in my car outside the diner, watching the sunlight spill across the world around me. It felt like the first time I'd truly seen daylight in months, even though it had only been hours since I walked out of that house. It was strange, standing on the edge of something new with no clear idea of what the next step would be. But at least I was moving forward. That was enough for now. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. There was still the house to deal with, still Emma. But for once, instead of feeling crushed by the weight of what was ahead, I felt calm. Not because I had all the answers, I didn't, but because I wasn't looking backward anymore. I wasn't replaying all the ways I could have fixed things, or obsessing over what I should have done differently. What was done was done. It was time to confront the mess, to face whatever was left. The drive back to the house felt faster than usual, my mind shifting into a higher gear, focused on what had to be done. When the house finally came into view, it didn't feel like home anymore. But I wasn't the same person who had left it either. The man who had walked out the night before wasn't the same one stepping through that door now. That man had left with a heart full of rage, betrayal, and a faint, stubborn shred of hope that maybe things could change. Now I was just ready to move on. Our house, my house, no longer felt like home. It was a hollow shell, a place where two people had once lived but only one had cared enough to fight for what they had. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Emma's car still parked out front. Part of me had hoped she'd be gone, that I could walk inside without the weight of another confrontation pressing down on me. But deep down, I knew better. Emma wasn't the type to leave. She would stay, clinging to the fragile idea that we could somehow salvage this. But she didn't understand. There was nothing left to fix. I stepped out of the car, the air heavy with anticipation. Each step toward the front door feeling like a march into battle. I paused on the porch, taking a deep breath to steel myself, then pushed the door open. The house felt like it was holding its breath, the tension from the night before still thick in the air. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in her hands. She looked up the moment I walked in, her red, swollen eyes locking onto mine. Her face was pale, her expression wrecked. "You came back," she said softly, her voice trembling with fragile hope. I didn't respond immediately. I stood there, looking at her, trying and failing to reconcile the broken woman in front of me with the person I had loved for so many years. But I couldn't. Too much had happened. "I didn't come back for us," I said finally, my voice steady and cold. "I came back to get things in order." Her hands trembled as she set her phone down, her gaze dropping to the table. "I know you're angry. I know I messed up, but we can still—" "No," I cut her off, the word sharp and final. "We can't. We're done, Emma." I stepped closer, letting my words hit with the full force of their meaning. "Last night wasn't just a mistake. It was the truth coming out. You've been lying to me for months. Whatever we had, it's gone. I can't forgive that." She blinked at my words, her lips parting like she wanted to argue, to fight. But she stopped herself. Her mouth closed, and for the first time, I saw the reality sinking into her eyes. I saw the pain there, but it didn't stir any pity in me. All of this was the consequence of her choices. "So, what now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I sat down across from her, an odd sense of calm settling over me. "We end this," I said simply. "We'll split the house, the finances, everything. I'll move out as soon as I can find a place. There's no need to drag this out." She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the table as if she couldn't bring herself to look at me. I guess I knew this was coming," she murmured. "But I didn't think it would happen like this." "Neither did I admitted. Though the truth was, I had seen it coming. Maybe not in the way it unfolded. Not with the motel or the lies coming to a head like this, but in the cracks that had been spreading for months. The signs had always been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I had seen it coming for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. For the next hour, we talked logistics. It felt cold, clinical, like a business meeting instead of the dismantling of a life we had built together. Who would keep the house? How we would divide the money? The steps to finalize the divorce. Emma tried to stay composed, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. Every so often, she glanced at me, her eyes filled with guilt, like she was searching for words that could somehow erase the damage. But she never said them, because there were no words left. When we were done, I stood, ready to leave. I'd already packed what I needed the night before. I didn't want to spend another second in that house, surrounded by ghosts of what used to be. As I grabbed my bag, Emma stood too, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Fresh tears welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice breaking, "for everything. I never meant to hurt you." I looked at her, feeling detached from the moment, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Her words were hollow now, stripped of meaning by everything that had come before. They couldn't undo what she had done. "I know," I said quietly, my tone final, "but it's too late for that." And with that, I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had built together. I didn't know where I was going, maybe to Ryan's place for a few nights, or maybe to another motel until I found something more permanent. But as I drove away, I felt something I hadn't expected. I wasn't looking back. For the first time, I wasn't replaying all the things I could have done differently. I wasn't torturing myself with the what-ifs or trying to figure out how I could have saved something that was doomed from the start. I was thinking about what came next. The future was uncertain, wide open in ways that should have scared me. But it didn't. For the first time in a long time, I felt something close to freedom. And that was enough. Later, sitting in another dingy motel room, I found myself scrolling through my phone. Photo after photo of Emma and me. Vacations, hikes, birthdays, little celebrations of a life I thought we had. Each one felt like a lie now. I started deleting them, one by one, watching as they disappeared like dead leaves falling from a tree. With every swipe, I felt a weight lifting from my chest, a painful but necessary letting go. The more I deleted, the more I realized just how much of my life I had invested in someone who wasn't who I thought she was. Finally, I put the phone down and stared at the cracked ceiling above me. The quiet settled in around me, heavy but not unbearable. There was no going back. I knew that now. No words or promises could undo what had happened. Emma had made her choice, and now I had made mine. This was the first night of my new life. Alone. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe, after everything, it was time to figure out who I was without her. Time to reclaim the pieces of myself I'd lost trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. As I drifted into a restless sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. It's over. And this time I wasn't afraid of what that meant.